In the early 70s, Bruce Lee would start to have breakthrough successes in America, which led to the craze of everyone being obsessed with martial arts. I mean, Enter the Dragon features a martial arts tournament where fighters from various backgrounds battle it out to see who's the best. If that sounds familiar, that's because this is, well, I don't know, pretty much the plot to every fighting game ever. And in Game of Death, Bruce Lee is essentially taking on an endgame boss rush and is probably actually the inspiration for that concept. Bruce's influence definitely inspired many game developers that made fighting games whether they knew it or not. But most of the early fighting games were just emulating sports like boxing, but the first one to take the Bruce Lee approach was Karate Champ. Initially, the game was released in arcades where it did phenomenally well, leading to many different home conversions. It is often credited as the first real one-on-one fighting game. And all that's well and good, but it does kinda suck. And another early game in this genre was the first Street Fighter, which is a hell of a thing.
Well, surely the older one is the better one, right?
No. Everything feels jerky, and don't even get me started on how hard it is to actually pull off any of the special moves in this one. But it has classic characters like Bald Man, Ninjago, Old Man, and who could forget Punk Man with Mohawk? Joking aside, these games might not have been the best, however they set out the formula that the genre would follow for the rest of its history. And then of course along came a little game called Street Fighter 2 to completely change the game and blow up this new genre of one-on-one fighting games. I was just being born around the release of this game, but my brother, who's 10 years older than me, remembers it very well. He would always tell me stories about him winning money down the arcades by betting with people on matches. His favourite story to tell is always the one where a bunch of kids bet that he couldn't beat the arcade mode with Zangief. And he of course went through the whole game with Zangief on 1 credit and won himself a few £100. Obviously people hadn't cottoned on to the grappler meta yet.
Jesus Christ.
My brother having a love of Street Fighter was imparted onto me when I entered this world, as he had me playing it when I was about 4. I'll never forget the memory of my brother getting annoyed trying to teach me to pull off my first ever Hadouken. And other than platformers, fighting games was the first genre that I truly got hooked on. I liked fighting games so much that I even bought Rise of the Robots on the SNES when that came out. Young me, you poor soul. That aside, I did play really good fighting games as well, like Street Fighter 2 and Killer Instinct on the SNES, with my brother absolutely destroying me on both. Fast forward to the PS1 era of gaming and a whole new type of fighting games are on the rise, 3D fighting games that were a whole different beast. Sega with their Virtua Fighter series ushered in this new generation of fighting games, being the template for all these new games to follow. And my love of this genre was probably at its fever pitch during this era, and we had the best of both worlds, excellent 2D fighting games and excellent 3D fighting games. Now mind you, I'm not the greatest at fighting games, but that didn't stop me from playing them and getting absolutely angered when the CPU would hand me my arse. And that filthy casual mindset and perspective is kind of the place this video is going to be coming from. This video is just going to be me taking a walk through one of the most interesting eras of fighting game history on my favourite games console. I'm not going to be covering literally everything, but this is definitely going to be the kind of video that could easily have a sequel. So if there's a game I didn't mention that you'd like to see in a theoretical part 2, let me know in the comments. If you're expecting some high-level fighting game analysis, you might want to look elsewhere. Because this video is just going to be memes and me gushing about games that I barely understand.
I have no idea what's going on, but count me in.
So let's start right at the beginning with the launch of the PS1 itself, and while there wasn't a glut of fighting games, there was a couple of important ones. There was a grand total of 3 fighting games available at the launch of the PS1 in America and Europe. And these 3 games were the absolute barnstormers of Battle Arena Toshinden, Zero Divide, and Street Fighter the movie. I mean, that movie is bad, but at least it gave us Raul Julia Bison, and that's the meme gift that keeps on giving. I didn't know that Zero Divide was a launch game before making this video actually, because it was only a launch game in the US. For some reason, us in Power Territories got it a few months later, and I actually really like the Zero Divide series. But let's talk about Battle Arena Toshinden now, like I didn't already write this section, not realising Zero Divide needed to go here as well, because a lot of the launch day lists left it out. I'm definitely not a deranged goblin that's going to mail all of these people that did these wrong lists copies of Crazy Frog's debut, the magnum opus, Crazy Hits.
I wish to God that somebody would do something to block out the voices in my head for 5 minutes.
I can't believe I legitimately bought a copy of Crazy Frog's Crazy Hits for this video. I'm pretty sure I was just put on this earth to suffer. But anyway, video games, that's what we're here to talk about, right? Battle Arena Toshinden is one of those games that I've always seen and heard about but never played. And despite being a bit forgotten about, it actually has a lot of games on the PS1 getting 5 releases. And you can tell it's very heavily inspired by Virtua Fighter because it does literally feel like that game with weapons. I might be about to hurt a lot of people's feelings here, but this first entry in the series kind of sucks. Everything just feels so slow and laggy and nothing feels kinetic like any good fighting game should. And another big sin for me is that most of the roster is just so boring, it's just a bunch of bland looking dudes and dudettes. Any good fighting game should have a roster of characters that you look at and go, hell yeah. I do quite like Rongo though, who is literally just clubbing people to death with a giant stone bat like an absolute savage. And there's a character called Sophia who's just a blonde dominatrix who has the best move in the game.
I'm gonna slap some sense into you!
That sound effect is just noise. I would be annoyed with myself if I didn't also mention Foe, who's probably my favourite character in this game. He's such a weird little gremlin man and just makes strange noises, and he's just the kind of character I appreciate. And the design of the last boss, Gaia, is awesome as well, and it just looks a whole lot better than Hayachi in Tekken 1. He does continue the fighting game tradition of being a cheap, annoying end boss fight though. And that's the thing about this game, it's really bare bones. You just have the arcade mode and versus mode. You don't even unlock that many characters or have any proper endings for each character to give you motivation to beat the arcade mode with everyone. I do like that there's ring outs and that backers block, and the fact that there's special moves like something like Street Fighter. And the graphics, while nothing special, are pretty appealing to look at for a PS1 game that's this early. But none of that matters when the experience of actually playing the game is this awful, and thankfully this series improves quite a lot after this entry. Let's go a little bit easy on this one because it's a launch title after all, it's trying its best. And it does have one thing going for it that's kind of revolutionary. Now, I'm not 100% on this, but I think it's the first 3D fighting game where you can actually sidestep. You know, actually taking advantage of the fact that it's in 3D instead of just being polygon versions of Street Fighter. Which might seem simple, but all the future 3D fighting games will utilise this to a much bigger degree. So in a way, it's an innovator.
What a look! He thinks he's people!
This series definitely got off to a bit of a rocky start, but Battle Arena Toshinden 2 fixes a lot of the issues I had with the first game. They even have a fancy FMV intro here that actually has real people in it. Oh my god, so mind-blowing. Look, they even got a woman dressed up as a dominatrix to wink at us like she's having a stroke. Wow, Owen Wilson. I bet when they were making this game in Japan, they were like, this is going to be exactly what the Westerners want. This game is still pretty bare bones on the modes front, but that's to be expected of a fighting game at the time. And it definitely feels like this game is just trying to play catch up with the likes of Tekken 2 and Virtua Fighter 2. However, it is a massive improvement on just about every level, down to the gameplay, graphics, and presentation. I actually had fun playing this one and didn't want the pain of life to end with every second that passed. It feels a lot more responsive and fluid. I mean, it's still not really perfect when you compare it to its contemporaries though. And I think this game's main problem is that it's competent enough, but every game around it was just so much better. And it still has that problem for me of having an utterly boring roster of characters that are really forgettable. I do like the addition of this guy called Chaos though, because he's kind of like Foe and he's just a weird little goober, and I'm all about that. An area that got a real downgrade, however, was the boss or bosses, because there's a sub-boss chick as well called Uranus. Bum. You get it, because Bum. Who is literally just a woman angel thing that is probably the most uninspired design you could have gone with. I know Tekken 2 did the same thing, but their cast is just better overall. And then you end it all off against another woman called the Master, who just cheaply kicks your ass with a giant magic sword. I'm in the camp of bosses should be giant monsters or badass things, not just a badly designed person. So overall, this is a good sequel, but not the best. The game did weird things to Rungo though. I mean, what's going on there, buddy?
You notice anything different about me?
What, your giant boobs?
After playing those first two games, I was getting ready to write this series off entirely until I played the third game, because it's fantastic. It literally fixes every issue I had with the first two games and injects a bit more of the crazy that I like in my fighting games. But I can't let it get completely off the hook, because the intro FMV here looks absolutely awful. Especially when you compare it to the snazzy intros all the other fighting games were getting at the time. Why is my man shooting bullets out of his tits and not the gun? And what's wrong with his face? There is a man with a chainsaw now, and I approve of this greatly. Why has no one else done this in a fighting game? Oh my god, look, it's the Lazy Town. Is this where the Lazy Town comes from? Other than the intro being a bit rubbish, everything else is great and a massive step forward for the series. The first thing that I noticed is that there's an option in the menu to make the game 60 FPS with flat graphics in the background, which honestly is a great option and makes this game feel as smooth as butter to play and started me off on a good foot with it. I mean, a console game in the 90s giving you this option is crazy considering most modern games don't even do this. I did choose to play it in the 30 FPS mode for this video though to make the gameplay footage look a bit nicer to look at. Honestly, it doesn't feel as good, especially after treating myself to that 60 FPS, but it feels great to play still. There's no lulls in the gameplay this time, unlike the last two where it felt like it took you 5 years to get up off the ground. It just feels really kinetic, and even when I'm just button mashing like the caveman I am, pretty stuff will happen on screen. And they even added in mega super awesome chocolatey special moves to this game. I'm not sure that I like the new closed-in arenas better than the older games ones, but it allows you to air juggle people, so I can't complain. I enjoyed the feeling of playing this game so much that I actually played this way longer than I had to for the purposes of this video. The roster actually has wacky and interestingly designed characters, and you can unlock a lot of characters by beating the arcade mode, which just made me want to sit there and beat the arcade mode until I unlocked all the characters. I mean, they went wild enough to include a robot and a crazy monkey with Wolverine claws that shoots lasers. The last boss is a bit of a letdown though, but I'll let this game off because it's so enjoyable to play. This one might be a bit of an overlooked hidden gem in the PS1 fighting games library, and I really like it. The monkey is the star of the show for me though, because he's kind of like this game's Yoshimitsu or something. He gives the enemy a tour of his insides every time he wins. Beast!
Why do they put so much emphasis on the butt?
Ballerina Toshinden 4 on the other hand is a massive step back for the series and basically sets it back to the quality of the second game. Which is unacceptable really when you consider the caliber of the games coming out at the same time as this game. Tekken 3, which we will definitely talk about later, was already a year old when this game was released in Japan. And for some reason this game only got released in Japan and PAL territories. But trust me America, you ain't missing much. It actually starts off pretty promisingly with a pretty good looking anime intro cutscene, which made me a little bit sad because there was nothing here for me to make fun of. Don't worry, there's plenty to clown on in the rest of the game. I might have said this game is a big step back, and it is, however they did add in a proper story mode here. And you'll see throughout the course of this video that I'm a sucker for any fighting game with a proper story mode. I mean, it's not exactly Shakespeare like most fighting game story modes from this era, but it gives you a reason to play as all the different characters. The game is actually kind of like Tekken Tag Tournament in a way, because all the battles are team battles in this game. So every time you start a new story mode, you take a team of 3 fighters into the battles, and it's not the worst. I feel like they did this so they only had to write like 5 stories, because no matter who you pick in the team, the main story is basically the same. Each group of fighters is trying to gather 4 legendary weapons so they can become god or something. I don't know, I have ADHD and I can barely pay attention to this guff. You can tell this PAL version was rushed because the translation is awful and full of spelling errors. I mean, at one point a guy says, "Nuff said." A big fat Baz from Stoke-on-Trent did this translation, didn't they? Next thing you know, the characters are going to be talking about how much they love their football and their fish and chips. The characters in this one are just really mid apart from this team of bad guys who I love because they're all weirdos. Definitely not because there's a sexy ninja lady. That's the best set of polygons I've seen on the PS1. Phenomenal.
Did you just say tits?
Most of the characters fall into that category of fighting game characters that I hate, which is just generic looking humans with weapons. But I do have to mention the fact that they literally ripped off Toomba and put him in this game. He even has a pig, you couldn't have made it more obvious. The cast here is just so small and unmemorable compared to the last game's set of characters. And the fact that you have to use them in teams make it feel like there's basically only a couple of characters. But the biggest cardinal sin that this game makes is that the gameplay is nowhere near as enjoyable as the last game. Obviously I'm taking into account that this is a PAL region game, so it's running a few frames slower than the Japanese version. Even when you factor that in, it just feels so janky and sluggish and not as fluid as the last game. Sure, it's not so bad that I don't want to play it, but it's just a big shame after playing the last game. They're lucky they appease me with a story mode. What can I say? I have problems. The last boss in this one is the gunman from the older games, and I gotta say it might be the lamest final boss fight. You can only manage to fight him if you manage to do the whole story mode without continuing, and he's so cheap. So we've created this last boss, and he's literally just a dude who's brought a gun to a knife fight. Wow, very creative. When you beat the game with everyone, you can unlock him, and you can literally live out that scene from Indiana Jones over and over again. This game is alright, and it's not the worst game ever, but it is kind of messed up how they have a little girl angel character whose pants get shown off when they fight. Don't worry bro, she's just a 5 million year old angel lolly. Why are you so bothered bro? Japan, stop it, get some help.
Anime was a mistake.
And they liked that lolly girl so much, they went, what if we made the whole game characters like that? And Battle Arena, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, was born. I'm kidding of course, but this game actually came out just after the original game, but it felt wrong to ruin the flow with it, so I just chucked it in here at the end. The game was released only in Japan, and it shows because this game is a bit of a weird one. It was the style at the time for fighting game series to have weird chibi spin-offs, and Ballerina Toshinden decided to get in on the act. Usually these games are quite good and a fun little side distraction like Pocket Fighters, but not here. At first I got really confused because the intro cutscene had the real actors return with a killer heavy metal song playing. And then it just randomly flipped into this cartoonish aesthetic right at the end, which gave me a severe whiplash. And then I clicked on the first menu, assuming it to be the arcade mode like in any other fighting game, but it took me to some videos. It was a Japanese lady talking to me telling me how to play the game. I assumed this game with chibi characters was aimed at kids, who would have guessed it? I went through every menu and it doesn't really seem to have any arcade mode, it's just one-off fights. And since it was following Ballerina Toshinden 1, you can guess that it doesn't control the best. This plays so horribly and it might honestly be the worst one of these games I've played. What the hell have they done to these characters as well? They aren't chibi, they're just borderline demonic. So yeah, overall, the Ballerina Toshinden series isn't the best, but it does have some pretty standout moments like the third game. It might not be the most revered series or anything, but it's an interesting footnote in fighting game history. And it's really important in the story of the PS1 because it's the first actual series of fighting games on the system. But let's stop talking about this Toshinden kids game, it's for children and no one likes them. Let's talk about something based, like Street Fighter the movie, the game.
Of course!
I just want to take a moment to congratulate myself on that revolutionary and incredibly smooth transition. I am truly the greatest YouTuber of all time. You saw the way I zoomed in on that picture. Not anyone can do that. I am special. This is the worst video I've ever made. And I know I've already used that Bison of course clip in 50 million of my videos, but it's perfect and how could I not abuse it? So believe it or not, this was the joint first fighting game on the PlayStation along with Battle Arena Toshinden. In the early to mid 90s, Street Fighter fever had gripped the globe and we actually got a star-studded Street Fighter live action movie. And it might actually be one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Sometimes in a good way and sometimes in a bad way. But as a kid I lapped this stuff up because of how obsessed I was with Street Fighter on the SNES. I did a few years later find the far superior Street Fighter 2 anime movie though, which was far better. Stick with that one. I mean, it's even free on YouTube, so no excuses. You should just go watch it now. I mean, it has Alice in Chains and Korn on the soundtrack. Anyway, there I go, getting down on that Degrassi again. So yeah, this terror good movie came out and they decided to make a game out of it that was actually in the arcades and on the Saturn before the PS1 version. And you might notice that it kind of looks like Mortal Kombat, its biggest competitor. This game is like a fever dream in many ways. If it didn't already exist and you showed it to me, I would assume it's some sort of ROM hack. It's like a game from an alternate reality where Mortal Kombat was a pixel-based 2D fighter and Street Fighter was the gory human animated one. I'm gonna be honest, that's actually a really good concept for a ROM hack. Mortal Kombat that's basically Street Fighter. It probably already exists, but I'm not gonna look it up because I can't be bothered. Future editing me, put footage of it here if it exists, and thank you, you're a doll. What was I doing again? So I've known about and heard about this game for ages and I was expecting it to be the worst thing I've ever played. While it wasn't exactly good, it wasn't that bad either because a pale imitation of Street Fighter is still kind of fun. I mean, it does start off like any bad movie tie-in game from the era with bad quality clips from the movie it's based on. When you get to actually experience the gameplay, it's literally just Street Fighter 2 again, but this time it looks incredibly ugly. I mean, the graphics in the old Mortal Kombat games look better than this, and those are as old as Keith Richards. He's going to die when I release this video, isn't he? Future people, let me know in the comments if he's still going. Please and thank you. I was expecting this game to play way differently than a normal Street Fighter game, and it's kind of disappointing that it's just a normal Street Fighter gameplay. At least they could have made the controls like some weird Mortal Kombat wannabe at least, so I'd have something to talk about. They did add in my guilty pleasure of a fighting game story mode, but even this can't save it from being utterly bland. It's just still images from the movie with text over and crappy choose your own adventure choices between the battles. And you have to play as Claude Van Guile, which I guess makes sense, but I'm crap as Guile, so it ruins this for me. If you gave me my man Saga, I would have been ripping up this story mode like I did in the arcade mode. In many ways, this game is just your typical launch game because it feels like no effort went into making this game at all. I've definitely played much worse games, however most of those games manage to at least elicit a response from me that's more than just meh. This game commits the high treason of just being so mid that it hurts.
Stop being so boring, Rick. Oh, that's nice, isn't it? That's very nice!
And the last PS1 fighting game launch title is Zero Divide, the criminally underrated robot fighting game. It's almost like someone saw that awful Rise of the Robots game and went, what if we made that game good? And I actually had this one growing up, so that's another reason I have a bit of a soft spot for it. And it actually holds up pretty well. Now, I'd be lying if I said this game was perfect or anything, but my nostalgia is probably making me like it more. Because it does feel a little bit slow to play and there's only 2 attack buttons, which makes it feel very limited. But you've got to look at this game in the context of which it came out. It's a launch title that for me plays better than all the other launch fighting games. I mean, I would be somewhat heretical and say it actually, in my opinion, plays a lot better than the first Tekken. It does commit a massive sin for me by making block a button instead of not just simply being back. Any game that does that just instantly feels less fluent to play in my opinion. However, this game has a saving grace. And that saving grace is the fact that this game has cool robots fighting each other, which is probably why I ended up with this game in my collection as a kid. It doesn't matter how old I get, I'll always be excited by games that let me fight as or against robots and cool monsters. I just love all the designs in this game. I mean, for God's sake, you can play as a robot dragon that shoots fire. The look of the characters in the arenas is just so damn clean looking. It has that peak PS1 game aesthetic. And when I do these type of videos, I will basically never mention the music, but I have to with this game because it rules. It's just like someone went, I want to make my own Rush album, and then that was the soundtrack to the game about robots beating each other up. It just slaps so much and I can't help but rock out to all the cheesy keyboards and funky bass while I'm playing. A silly game like this has no right having a soundtrack that kicks this much ass, and as a Rush mega fan, I approve of it greatly. Sure, like a lot of fighting games of its time, there isn't much to it, but who cares when the game is so much fun to play. I like that they at least made the arcade mode a bit interesting by turning it into a tower where you have to defeat all the enemies before you can progress. This way of you being able to replay characters until you beat them over and over again kept me playing for hours as a kid. But make no mistake, this game is incredibly hard and kicked my ass back then and now. Playing this reminded me why I should stay away from fighting games.
Instead of doing the traditional rating system, I'm gonna go off myself.
And Zero Divide actually got a sequel, believe it or not, that was only released in Japan and PAL territories for whatever reason. I got really excited the first time I played this game because I saw the option that said story on the menu. But it turns out they didn't do a proper story mode for this entry, it's just a snazzy intro video explaining the story of this game. And honestly, after listening to it, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Something hackers, I think. What hackers have to do with a bunch of robots fighting each other, I don't know, but it feels like the plot to a Neil Breen movie. I like that the hacker guy from London looks like he should be fronting a nu metal band. If he's from my hometown, he should be singing about how he wants to shank someone because of their postcode, as is tradition. I think the head of these hackers is trying to create Skynet or something, and that's why you're trying to stop him by beating up his robots. What I don't get is who's controlling these robots, and why is these robots beating each other up going to do anything? And if all these robots fighting in this tournament want to stop Skynet, why don't they just team up and kill it instead of wasting time on each other? Overanalyzing PS1 game plots is pointless, it's like a cat flapping an elephant house. Disappointment over there being no story mode aside, this game is fantastic and improves on everything from the first game. It just plays so smoothly, and that's even with the fact that I'm playing the PAL version that's running at 50 frames per second. And I was so surprised by the fact that they added in me as a playable character in this game. Might be biased, but this is a good move. And because of that silly goober's name, the following thing exists and needs to become a meme immediately.
Cancer. Win. It's so hard to find a series that is so based...
I gotta admit, after the first time I heard it say that, I was pissing myself laughing for a good couple of minutes. And coincidentally, I think Cancer might be my favourite character in the game. I mean, he's a goofy robot crab. How can you not love this good boy? I didn't mention this in the last section because I'm bad at reviewing games, but there was a body damage system in that last game. And here they changed that a bit so you take damage in fights and bits of your robot will fall off. So by the end of the battle, your robot will be messed up and have an eyeball hanging out or its brain showing. It's a detail that just makes the fighting feel a bit more impactful and nice and juicy, like a bit of hot spicy meat in and around your mouth hole. Mwah! The graphics just look so damn crisp as well. I absolutely love this level with the moon and the fog looming in the background. And the brilliant rushy soundtrack returns for this game, and it slaps just as hard as it did in the first game. I mean, if I was going to try and be a little bit more critical here, they could have maybe added some more characters or unlockables. Sure, the silly crab boy is the best and I would die for him, but the other character they added in is just a nurse robot. Oh wow. And the last boss in this game might be one of the most underwhelming in fighting game history. It's literally just a naked robot lady. Wait, why do I have a problem with this again? Sure, naked ladies are all well and good. I mean, I could have just ended the sentence there, but I need a giant mecha death Christ at the end of my fighting game. Overall, Zero Divide is a criminally underrated series that more people need to give a go. And they gave a robot a stupid moustache.
What's driving me crazy is that photo right there. Zoom in on that. It's one of those cops in a black uniform with a mustache. You know that guy's a coward. You know he's a piece of garbage. You know he's weak.
Well, the PS1 didn't get off to the best start with those two clunkers and that one decent game, but things certainly did get better after that. And you, like me, might have been surprised that Tekken wasn't included in that launch lineup because I swear it was one. But it wasn't, however, but it was so damn close to the launch of the PS1 it might as well be considered an honorary member of the lineup. And going into Tekken 1 here, I was assuming this whole section of the video was going to be me bashing this game. But I had a really good time playing this again. I got into Tekken when the second game came out and I played the absolute hell out of it in arcade mode and versus with my brother. We'll get into how much of a git he was with the Tekken games later. I did eventually end up with a copy of Tekken 1 because it was so cheap and I wanted to see what the prequel to one of my favourite games ever was like. And I remember absolutely hating it as a kid because everything just felt like a pale imitation of Tekken 2. I don't know what child me was expecting. I also went back to it and played it for a video I did on PS1 fighting games ages ago on my old channel, and still there I didn't like it. Now, older me still not liking it I think came down to playing the PAL version on actual hardware that runs a little bit slower than the Japanese and American versions. The 50Hz versions of 2 and 3 aren't hit as bad by the PAL downgrade in my opinion because the game player knows is a lot more fluid. But I think playing it at 50 instead of 60 might have just made the more clunky Tekken 1 feel worse than it actually is. But playing it again now through emulation using the American version of the game, I had an absolute blast. I don't think I can ever go back to playing PAL retro games.
Your weakness offends me. Me blowing a raspberry right there may have even startled you, and if that's the case, you absolutely make me sick, you fool.
I remember complaining that playing Tekken 1 felt like playing Tekken 2 but on the moon, and it really isn't that bad. I went in thinking I would only need to play this for about 10 minutes to get the gist of it again, then write this section up. But once I got playing, I just couldn't stop myself from wanting to have one more go and try out a different character. Tekken 1 for me boils down to in essence what makes this series so great in the first place, and that is that the gameplay is just so much fun. The game was giving me the crumping of my life and making me feel that same anger it made me feel as a kid, but I still kept playing. Playing all the other fighting games from around the launch of the PS1 really puts it into stark contrast why this series is so special and why it stood out so much. All of the other games I played had some forgettable characters and gameplay that felt slow and unresponsive. And then you play Tekken 1 and it makes you go, damn, this is so great to play and look at. Sure, the graphics aren't great by today's standards, but who cares when it's this amazing to play? It's as bare bones as the other games that came out at the time, however, it just doesn't matter. I think the best thing Tekken did was introduce unlocking a new character every time you beat the arcade mode with a different character. And having those cheesy yet lovable animated end credit scenes just makes you want to try and beat the game with everyone. King's ending is just so peak 90s CGI PS1 cutscene goodness and I love it. Why are the children badly green screened in? King is my favourite Tekken character. I mean, he ticked two of Child Me's favourite things. 1, a monster of some description. 2, is a wrestler.
Yeah, boy.
Sadly, I've come to realise, though, over the course of playing these games again, that favourite doesn't mean my best character. Because I played through the arcade mode as him for my first run through, and I got BTFO'd all over the place. Sure, I could have lowered the difficulty, but I wanted to recreate the experience I had playing this game as a kid, which was pain, anger, and torment. It legitimately took me over 20 minutes to beat the arcade mode with King. Then I played it through with Law and it took me a couple of minutes. Makes me sad, why do I suck so much with my favourite character? I think that's the main thing this game has over the other fighting games of its time, that the character designs are just so good. You just want to play as every character and there's enough of a smattering of weird characters to keep my weird childish monster obsession happy. I mean, you have 2 robots you can play as, and that's not as many robots as Zero Divide, but at least they were trying. My common complaints with a lot of these fighting games is that the characters just feel like a bunch of dudes and dudettes. But here, even the characters that are just normal people appeal to me, which means they're doing something right. I think it's because they're all weird, wacky looking people, like Paul with his absolutely ridiculous Guile from Street Fighter hair. The game does kind of break my rule of having the last boss be some dude though, so I have to dock a couple points there just to be fair. I only like it here because it's Hayachi and I know who he is, but if I didn't, it's just some old balding dude with mad hair. I do respect the commitment of him going with that haircut though. The later games would fix this issue that only I, a monster-obsessed man, would have though, so it's all good, they learnt their lesson. It's ugly, it's rough, I'll stop talking about your mum and get back to Tekken though. That's good. However, it's still Tekken, and it's still a great game that was a real step up in the 3D fighting game genre. And this port is just phenomenal for what it is. It's incredible what they managed to fit into that PS1 disc. I do have questions about Law's face though. Why does he look like this?
You ever hear the expression, you got a face only a mother can love? That don't apply to you. You are uglier than the devil's asshole itself.
Tekken 2 pretty much takes everything that the first game did and improves on it. In many ways, it's the perfect sequel. I think that's the first thing that struck me upon playing this game again, just how good it was. Sure, I might have come around on the first game a bit through making this video, but it can't hold a candle to this game. It looks leagues better, and the characters even look better. I mean, look at Law, they made it look like he doesn't have a traumatic brain injury. And my god, the music in this entry is just totally popping, and I was bopping my head against my will multiple times while playing this game. It is always tradition for me to sit on the character select screen as long as I can so I can vibe to this menu music. It legitimately slaps more than it has any right to. I don't think I realised how much nostalgia I had for this particular entry in the series until I sat down to play it again. Memories came flooding back as I saw everything this one has to offer, and it was kind of overloading. I think it's because generally when I'm going to play a Tekken with friends or family, my go-tos are either Free or Tekken Tag Tournament. So this one probably gets a little bit lost, even though I probably played this one more than the other ones. Tekken 2 was when my journey with the series began, and it was actually my brother who first brought this game into the house. As I said earlier, I used to play a lot of fighting games with my older brother, and he was a lot older than me and actually already had a job around this time. Which is why most of my early gaming diet consisted of fighting games, because my brother was the one buying all the games at the time. He was a kickboxer and a keen martial arts fan, so these types of games really appealed to him and his friends. This was probably the first time I truly got obsessed with a fighting game since Street Fighter 2. And in many ways, with Tekken 2, I went deeper, trying to learn all the moves with my brother's tutoring. I mean, I still sucked at it back then and now, but I have random parts of all the characters' moves committed to muscle memory. If you ask me how to do certain combos or moves, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but my hands just know through instinct. This game in many ways was the first game that became a family thing in my house because we were all playing it. Sure, my dad used to nick my SNES to play stuff like Nigel Mansell's World Championship and Desert Strike, and my mum would play Buster Move 2 and Tetris when I was at school. But this was the first one where we all came together as a family to beat the hell out of each other in a video game. I remember one day coming home from school to find my mum and my dad on my PS1 in the living room so they could practice at Tekken 2. My mum's main was Jun and she would always beat my toddler ass with her repeatedly, and my brother would always kick my ass with Nino. Maybe this is where my hatred of women started.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
And my dad would use Gang Ryu for some reason. I don't know why, maybe my dad was secretly a weeb and he didn't tell me. All these memories came flooding back to me when I booted up this game and experienced how this gameplay hasn't aged a day. However, something else flooded back to me as well, and this was how angry this game makes me because I suck at it. I wanted to unlock everything for this part of the video, so I just sat there for 2 hours playing this game. Half of that was pure childhood enjoyment, and the other half was raising my blood pressure, which is dangerous for an old man like me. I'm ashamed to admit this, but the only time I ever broke a console was over this game. The arcade mode was kicking my ass something proper, as it always does, and I lost my mind and punched the hell out of my PS1, breaking it. I lied and said it just broke, and my parents actually managed to get a refund, and my brother has done worse with his own PS1s before. I'll talk about that later, don't worry about that. I swear they made the AI 10 times harder in this one because I definitely didn't have this much trouble with the first game. I can honestly see why young me did what he did because I was on the verge of throwing my PC out of the window even as an adult. Obviously this isn't the game's fault, this is more of a I should just get good scrub situation. And the reason I was playing this game so much and making myself irrationally angry was because I was tired of my brother kicking my ass. My brother was and always will be the king of Street Fighter 2, but I was determined not to let him have Tekken as well. And that didn't really work out in Tekken 2. However, after anime training montaging my way through Tekken 2 and 3, by the time Tekken Tag Tournament rolled around, I had that git. To this day, my brother can't beat me at Tekken. I had found my fighting game I could have him at. He wasn't too happy when I overtook him though. Another area this game ups the ante for the series is with the absolutely wild array of things you get to play as in Tekken 2. It might have one of the most maddest and unique rosters of any fighting game, and that includes its direct sequel. Sure, you get to play as a little dinosaur from a manga in 3, but can you play as a kangaroo or a raptor in boxing gloves? It was a trick question, of course you can't, because 2 is the most based. And it fixes my main problem with Tekken 1, the fact that you have this really cool array of characters and the last boss is just literally an elderly old man. But here they started a trend in this series of only having evil looking monsters and demons as their final bosses. Cause in my opinion, if your fighting game arcade mode ain't ending with a fight with a giant big evil eldritch beastie, you're quite frankly pathetic and worthless and you should sit down, you soylent infused abomination. Devil to me now is still one of the most iconic bosses in any video game, and his design, it's just so slick and perfect. He's not over designed and he just reminds me of one of those drawings of demons you'd see in an old medieval scroll or something. Getting up to him for the first time as a kid really had me YouTube a thumbnail facing like I had no testosterone. I guess I didn't then because I was a child, so that's kind of accurate I guess. All that being said though, he follows the arcade mode last boss classic playbook by being one cheap git. He's the only character in the game that can use projectiles with his admittedly really awesome laser eyes. But this move is just so hard to deal with because it's unblockable and it can get you pretty much anywhere you are. I won't hold it against him though because it makes for a great final boss battle in this weird void world. And the fact that you could actually play as him made it even better. I mean, he never overtook King as my favourite character, but I used him quite a lot. That's another big strength of Tekken 2, the characters are all so well done that instead of having only a small handful of characters that I'll play, I play as literally everyone in this game. Lei is one of the best additions in this game in my opinion because of his weird drunken fist fighting style. It's just really goofy and makes him feel like a troll character. By far my second favourite character as a kid though was Beck, the master of Hwang in Tekken 3. And like Hwang, this character is amazing because you can just spam the kick button and spectacular stuff will just happen. A button masher like me's dream. Tekken 2 is just an absolute joy to play and holds up way better than I thought it would, much like the first game. Now while I said it does have certain areas where I think it can stand up to Tekken 3, I still think it's trumped in every category by that game. Before we talk about that one, just one more thing. For whatever reason, when I was a kid, I had a crush on Kunimitsu. I'm really hoping that doesn't make me a furry.
Kill me! Now, please!
Tekken 2 might have been a pretty big deal when it came out, but Tekken 3 was like a phenomenon. Everyone I knew was excited about this game coming out, and everyone I knew bought it when it came out. I remember they were pushing the hell out of this game at the time in ads and marketing, it was everywhere. Of course, I didn't need any help getting excited about the release of this game after how good Tekken 2 was. I think most of us kids in the UK will always remember having this demo for Tekken 3, which seemingly was given out like candy. I've talked to various people over the years who aren't even big gamers that still remember this demo disc and this game. It came with the official UK PlayStation magazine, and I must have spent tens of hours playing this alone. Sure, you could only play as two new characters, Zhao Yu and Eddie, and I think this demo is why Eddie quickly became one of my favourite characters. This is a random tangent, but when I was a kid, I was very obsessed with Tekken 3 and playing as Eddie. So much so that one time I got into a fight with another kid and I thought, hey, why don't I try flipping about like Eddie would? I rolled about on the floor a bit first and the kid was really confused until I did a forward roll into his nose, leading to him running off crying. It's a stupid memory that I'll never forget. I mean, how many video games can claim that they helped you win a fight? The launch of this game was like an event to me and my brother, who had actually moved out and got his own place by the time Tekken 3 was released. The weekend it came out, my brother got it straight away and had me staying over his for a few days so we could complete it. It's one of my favourite gaming memories, me and my brother eating pizza and trying to figure out how to unlock all the characters. Whenever I boot up this game, that weekend just floods back to me and I can't see this title screen without thinking about him. Ha! Gay! And Tekken 3 is honestly as good as I remember and still as much of a joy to play as it was back then. There's no hint of rose-tinted glasses here, it's just that damn good. I mean, it could almost pass for an early PS2 game. I know I've said this for every Tekken game, but they've just refined the gameplay again and it's perfect. Everything feels buttery smooth to play, and I think the fact that the gameplay here is so good is why I remember 1 and 2 not feeling that great. How good this game is has tainted my memories of those games. Don't get me wrong, those games are still great, but not to this level of perfection. I don't know if it's the fact that the gameplay is just better in this game, but for whatever reason, I just never get annoyed in the arcade mode for this one. Maybe they made the normal mode a little bit easier in this one because they had reports of an angry English boy smashing his PS1. I think it's because in the older entries, even though they did play quite well, there was still a little bit of lag to the gameplay. And then when you get your ass handed to you, you feel like it's the game's fault that your character didn't do what you told them to do. Here, everything just feels so immediate, so even when I lost in this game, I just wanted to get back in there and punch people. The AI can bugger off when it's king though, because on normal, the AI shouldn't be one-shotting you with this infamous grapple combo. To be fair, I learned how to do this whole thing back in the day to beat my brother, so I know how he felt now. Like I said earlier though, I think the only thing I like less about this one than the second game is the roster. Don't get me wrong, the roster isn't bad or anything, but it feels a lot more buttoned up than the last game. The character designs are a bit more stripped back, however I did like what they did with Yoshimitsu and Jack in this game. And King's design in this game is just absolutely chef's kiss. I mean, look at the pure drip he's emanating here. Zoomers don't even know who King is or this game, but they secretly stole their looks from this fashion icon. And I obviously love Eddie, he's just such a fun character to play as you pretty much mash kick buttons and cool stuff happens. But a lot of the characters are just retreads of the older characters with slightly different movesets. However, Brian made his debut here and he's probably one of my favourite Tekken characters to play as. They did make the best set of boss characters for the arcade mode in this one though, fulfilling my lore of monsters for final bosses. And the design of these guys is just so well done. You have this green looking orc dude and then he turns into a massive gargoyle thing. I think it might just about top the pairing of Kazuya and Devil in Tekken 2 for me personally. Of course it's not all business because you do get the absolutely ridiculous characters of Gon and Dr. B. Gon is a manga character from Japan and they decided to put him in this game for some reason and he's like this game's odd job. It's a small orange dinosaur that plays beach ball and farts on people. How could I not love that? Dr. B kinda sucks, but it's funnier that they put an old man who can't even stand up in the game, I guess. And yes, I didn't bother to unlock him myself because there's no way I'm beating Tekken Force mode 4 times just to unlock him. And that's another thing this game does so well, the bonus modes like Tekken Ball and Tekken Force. They just add more silly fun for you to take part in, although Tekken Ball mode is kind of a bit lame really. But Tekken Force mode is something I loved back in the day and it's essentially what if Tekken was an old school 2D beat 'em up game. Me and my brother spent ages trying to beat this back in the day so we can unlock the last character, Dr. B. Coming back to this mode though, it hasn't aged the best, but I always like it when fighting games add in some little oddities like this. I think the main problem is how hard it is to target people and the camera angle not being the most helpful. Tekken 3 was a cultural moment and everyone who's around my age will always have fond memories to share of this game. And it's not that hard to see why it resonated so much with everyone because it's such a perfect game. Every time I come back to play this game, I get blown away all over again about how well it's aged and how well it holds up. And this game is so ingrained in who I am that to this very day, whenever I go to my fridge, I can't help but do this. Chicken. Talking of games I played the hell out of so much that they left a lasting impression on me, let's talk about Soul Blade or Soul Edge in some regions. Just like Tekken and Street Fighter remind me of my older brother, Soul Blade reminds me of my sister. She passed away when I was quite young, but she was the one that got me into music and video games. I can never not think of my sister when I play Crash Bandicoot, Clockwork Knight, or of course Soul Blade. This was actually her game, which is kind of weird because she wasn't really into fighting games all that much. It's one of those games that has dual layers of nostalgia for me because it reminds me of my sister and it's just a really good game. And I can't talk about this game without mentioning the absolutely amazing opening theme for this game, which I think might have been my first taste of the genre of folk metal because that's basically what it is. And I pretty much always love a metal band that has any type of folk instrument and this game might be to blame. It has no right to be this good, but it does, and here it is at the start of this game setting you up for an absolute banger of a game. And it's no surprise that this game rules considering it was made by the same people that made Tekken. For when this game came out, it looks amazing and might have some of the best gameplay of any PS1 fighting game. Coming back to it now, I was just taken by how much fun it is to play, and I didn't want to stop playing like I did with Tekken. It just feels like its own game and it's not just a carbon copy of Tekken with weapons stapled on the top of it. Tekken feels fast and frantic, and in comparison this game has a more considered, thinking man's fighting game approach. Maybe this just appeals to my deteriorating old man gaming skills more than Tekken, but I think I might honestly prefer this to Tekken. I think the way the gameplay works just makes me less annoyed when I lose and makes me want to try again instead of wanting to smash my PC. They even broke my fighting game rule of having block be a button instead of just hitting back. I think it works for this game because the game uses weapons and it makes the blocks feel a lot more impactful that way. It really helps make this game feel like a duel at the end of the movie, and it just feels so damn epic while you're playing it. Helping this is the fact that you can ring out your opponents in this game, which wasn't new but I always love it. It gives another push and pull to the combat, with it getting pretty damn frantic anytime you or your opponent is near a ledge. You cannot beat the feeling of how it feels to win a battle in this game by ringing someone out. It makes you feel like Leonidas.
This is Sparta!
I was and am a massive fan of medieval weapons, so it's just like a fighting game that was already geared towards me. Swords and axes are just so damn cool, man. That's why I like things like Warhammer Fantasy so much. The roster here is another big strong point of this game. It's another game where I just want to play as everyone. In this one, it isn't so much that the character designs are amazing, it's more that the different weapons give them their zazz. Every character feels like they play completely uniquely, of course, and I like the design of a couple of characters in particular though. Rock being a favourite of mine, he's probably the reason that to this day I love axes. You have your silly characters like Voldo, who's this weird bondage gimp assassin that makes Darth Vader noises. God bless Namco and their design team. But you've also got people like Li Long, who are just cool because he uses nunchucks, and nunchucks are rad. They might actually be the worst weapon ever designed, but in a video game you can make them the best. The game also sticks to my rule of arcade mode last bosses needing to be demons or monsters. The last battle with the demon corrupted version of Cervantes is great. I mean, look at the background. Namco just know how to make a good ending boss. They always seem to smash it out of the park. And I didn't realise this because I was a dumb kid when I actually played this game, but there's even a Weapon Master mode in this one. I always thought this game just had the arcade mode and still loved it anyway, so this just elevates it even more. This mode essentially works as a story mode for this game, and you already know that I love any fighting game that has those. It might not be as fleshed out as the one in later games, but it's still good and gives you these D&D type setups for every battle. And you have to take on battles that have different parameters, which just spices up the gameplay even more. All in all, for the time this game came out, it's incredible and does everything right, and it honestly might be my favourite PS1 fighting game. I mean, it has Taki. I definitely don't love this character just because it's another sexy ninja lady in skin-tight costumes. Definitely not, that's not me.
You people disgust me.
And while we're talking about classic PS1 fighters, I could not let this section go without talking about the Bloody Roar series. First I liked Kunimitsu and Tekken, now I like a game that's full of furries. Hopefully the virus doesn't overcome me and take me whole. The furry nature of this game aside, it's such a good concept for a game, and there's not many games where you can transform. It definitely has a little bit of that Dragon Ball Z I haven't even reached my final form about it. It gives the gameplay this feeling that no other game of this generation has because it gives you something else to think about. A lot of the battles will come down to when you choose to transform into your beast form, and there's a lot of nuances to it. Because the amount of time you can stay transformed is determined by how much meter you've built up, which is essentially your special meter. Do you transform straight away or get the upper hand right away and give your opponent the advantage later? Or do you do what I generally do in every battle and save up your meter for greater effect later on? These transformations aren't just aesthetic either, because you can regain some of your health back a little bit, and you can also get access to a whole different button of attack. The music for this whole series is just completely goated, with you getting the selection of proggy metal stuff. Again, like Zero Divide, it sounds like Rush to me, which is always going to be a positive in my books. This first game doesn't have the best roster in my opinion though, because the fighters look a bit generic. Although I do love Greg the Gorilla with his stupid but amazing design. Woof woof, Abraham Lincoln, am I right ladies? Bro looks like he just stepped off the set of the music video to Electric Six's Gay Bar video, and I appreciate him. Bakaru, the mole, is in this game and amazing, but I probably just like him because he's the same as his protege who's in the sequel. This game is kind of just a roster of monsters, but it too sticks to the sharp-dressed goblin golden rule of monster last boss. It starts off as a floating magic psychic lady, and then it turns into an unholy hell demon, which I greatly approve of. Then Bloody Roar 2 came along and took all the great bits from the first game and made them legendary. They gave a bat lady big old titties. Why are bat ladies in games always the sexy ones? What is sexy about a bat, you absolute degenerates?
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Sorry about that, had to just get that out there. I didn't play Bloody Roar 1 as a kid, but I did have Bloody Roar 2 and I played the absolute hell out of it. They kept the same slick gameplay from the first game and just built on everything else around it. For example, they've actually added in supers like you would get in the later Street Fighter games. And they've revamped the roster, which is much more to my liking, definitely more memorable than the cast of the first game. And just scrolling over it, you can tell why. It's because they went in a more monstrous direction, innit bruv? I mean, look at Stun the Insect, you can instantly go, that goblin boy is gonna love that purple fella. Unironically though, how does this character have so much swag in his half bug, half human form? His bug monster form has to be the best in the game, it looks like a scaled down kaiju or something. I do miss Abraham Lincoln, but we get the other best character in this game series, Buzima, the chameleon. My dude looks like he should be singing for a 90s skate band that's signed to Epitaph or something. He's just a weird evil guy who's so unapologetic in being a complete piece of human waste. And I personally appreciate that. In a world full of fake people always pretending to be nice, I would rather be stabbed in the front than in the back. He's like Bloody Roar's Keemstar or something. But how do I know what he's like, you might ask? Well, they've of course added in my favourite thing of a story mode. And every single character has gotten their own story mode for you to play through, which is fantastic. You get these little visual novel looking scenes between the battles that ties everything together. Sure, they reuse assets and areas quite a lot, but it's just so cool that it's here, and needless to say, I beat all of these as a kid. Bloody Roar 2 is not talked about enough when people talk about classic fighting games, and if you ain't played it, I highly recommend you do. I know it has furries in it technically, but you know, look at it this way, you're always beating up furries in this game. And this game also proves it once and for all. Lizard people are real, and they rule over us. Look, there's a reptoid right there!
Are the allegations true that you are secretly a lizard? I'm gonna have to go with no on that. I am not a lizard.
That's exactly what a lizard would say. I talked earlier about how formative Street Fighter 2 was in my early gaming life, and it continued being important to me going into the PS1 era. Sure, the Street Fighter games here weren't as ground-shakingly good as Street Fighter 2, but there was still some great stuff. Street Fighter Alpha 3, Marvel vs. Capcom, and Pocket Fighter were ones I played a lot of growing up. At this point, you've probably heard everyone and their mum talk about these games, so I'll talk about the ones I played the most. Don't worry, I will include these in a possible sequel to this video, so let me know if you want to see that in the comments. Wink wink, please validate my terrible channel. A Street Fighter series I never see anyone talk about is the Street Fighter EX series of games that was Street Fighter's first foray into 3D. I don't know why though, maybe everyone in the fighting game community hates them, but me, my brother and my nephew enjoyed them a lot. I haven't even mentioned my nephew in this video, but a lot of my gaming memories from this era and the PS2 era involve him. We would play EX plus Alpha and EX2 plus so much together, training to beat the menace that was my brother. I can't even play these games without thinking about him. It's amazing how video games can zap you back to points in your life. I remember my brother inviting his mates over and all of us playing this game a lot, winner stays on style. You can't beat those times when we used to all play games on the couch with a big group of people like that. It's the one reason I don't play fighting games as much anymore, because it's so hard to get people together to play when you're old as dust. But through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, what are these two games actually like, and do they hold up? They play as well as I remember, nothing more and nothing less, but they certainly are both lookers. Especially the second one, EX2, which apart from the blurry background could almost be a PS2 game. There isn't many bells and whistles with these two, they're just your standard modes that you'd expect from a fighting game. That's not to say that the gameplay isn't amazing, because it totally is. It's the Street Fighter you know and love, but with a bit more of a crunchy feel to it. It's always satisfying getting in a nice combo of hits and seeing your opponent go flying across the screen. The rosters here definitely appeal to child me's sensibilities with their plethora of weird looking dudes. Unsurprisingly, my favourite characters then and now were Skullomania, the Deadpool looking guy, and D-Dark, the guy who literally attacks people with dental floss and C4 while looking like Niles Crane if he joined a terrorist organisation.
Hello there, Fraser. Oh, what fresh hell is this?
The award for the most child-friendly Mii character design has to go to Garuda, who's literally a spiky demon man. The X games might just be Street Fighter 2 in 3D, but that's still a great thing and better than most fighting games on the system. Now let's switch over to talk about what Street Fighter's old rival Mortal Kombat was doing during this era. Speaking plainly, I've never been the biggest Mortal Kombat fan when it comes to the older games anyway. I obviously loved the look of them and the design of all the wacky looking characters, but the gameplay never did anything for me. However, when the PS1 generation came around, I got into Mortal Kombat big time, mainly because of Mortal Kombat Trilogy. It was like a wonderland to child me because literally every other character was some kind of demon. And while I still preferred the gameplay of Street Fighter over Mortal Kombat, I learned to appreciate it a little bit more with this game right here. I ended up so obsessed that I ended up watching that terrible Fox Kids animated TV show they had at the time. I remember getting my parents to record all the episodes onto videotape for me because the show was always on when I was at school. And then down this pipeline I got into the Mortal Kombat movies and watched them repeatedly. Yes, even Annihilation, I know it's bad, but I still loved it anyway. Sub-Zero was always my favourite, so much so that I even bought that awful Sub-Zero game that came out. That's a story for another time perhaps. I never did get into the other Mortal Kombat games on this system though, and I think that might have to be something for the sequel video. And coming back to Trilogy, honestly I still don't really like the Mortal Kombat gameplay that much. However, I get why I played this game so much as a kid. I mean, look at this roster, everything is as metal as Doom.
Basically, we're heavy metal, aren't we?
It's undoubtedly a classic game, and the rule of cool and nostalgia will always pull it into the classics for me personally. And of course, there's many more PS1 fighting games that everyone considers classics, however, these are the ones I'm going with for this video. This wasn't meant to be a definitive list of every PS1 fighting game, more of a walk through its history. And now I want to venture into some more obscure hidden gems and just straight up weird games. I don't think I can make this video and not include one of my favourite fighting game series of all time, Tobal. I've actually already made a full video on this series, but I still have to talk about it here because I want more people to play it. I'm basically one of those Jehovah's Witnesses going door to door preaching about the good word of Tobal. So the Tobal series was made by the kings of RPGs, Square, and the concepts and character designs were handled by the legendary Akira Toriyama. And you can tell he worked on this game because all the characters have his signature charm and look like they stepped off the pages of a manga. This was another one of the games that my brother brought home because he saw it was getting good reviews in the gaming magazines of the time. I was instantly taken with this game, and I mean, look at this weird collection of aliens and even a silly robot. And earlier I mentioned that I had a good story about my brother breaking a PS1, and it's related to this game. In Tobal 1 they actually added in a proper dungeon crawling quest mode that uses the fighting game's engine kind of like Tekken Force mode. And it works a little bit clunky by today's standards, but it's still a lot of fun and totally ahead of its time. And working your way through these dungeons is the way you can unlock all the wacky and weird boss characters in this game. And of course, knowing kid me, I wanted to play as all these guys more than anything in the world, and because I was crap at this game, it was of course my brother's job to do this. He must have spent weeks trying to beat this game mode for me, and let me tell you, he had no easy task, because if you die, that's it. He actually managed to unlock everyone apart from the final boss, and after weeks of trying, he finally got to the final boss. And the final boss kicked his lily white ass 6 ways to Sunday, and he'd have to do it all again. So he stood up and threw his PlayStation out of his 20 floors up flat. I gotta admit, I did feel bad because he was putting himself through all this hell for me. But I did laugh in the corner like Salacious Crumb next to Jabba the Hutt.
I know I shouldn't laugh, but I am, because it's funny.
Aren't little brothers the best? Tobal No.1 is definitely a game that more people need to play for the quest mode alone. But man, did they up the ante in the second game that never got released outside of Japan. It's like the first game but on steroids. The gameplay has gotten a lot smoother and the graphics are a massive step up. I mean, look at them bad boys. However, the area that got the biggest overhaul was the quest mode that's now more like the RPGs Square was known for. You actually have a hub world with NPCs to talk to, shops to buy stuff from, and dungeons to plunder. And the thing that adds the most replayability to this game for me is the fact that they've added in a splash of Pokemon. In the first Tobal, I always loved the designs on all the weird polygonal beasties you could fight in the quest mode. And here in Tobal 2, you can actually catch them much like you would in a Pokemon game to make them playable in the other modes of the game. Which technically gives this game the largest roster of any fighting game with over 200 playable characters to catch. Sure, most of these characters have very shallow movesets, but it's amazing nevertheless, and I got addicted to collecting all of them. I mean, in what other fighting game can you uppercut someone out of existence playing a literal penguin? The dungeons are kind of roguelike in nature, with them being completely different every time you go through them. And you have to eat food to keep yourself fit as you work your way through the dungeon and even level up your character. You have to level up each limb of your character by using them in battle, which I don't really like. And this mode is ridiculously difficult if you're like me and have no idea what you're doing. However, Tobal 2 is one of the most unique fighting games on the PS1 and one I think more people have to play because it's so weird.
You're weird, but I like you.
Talking of weird games, here's one I'd never heard of until I started looking for some games for this video. And it might have one of the most interesting spins on the fighting game formula in the PS1's library. It starts off well with a banging anime intro that just sets off my 90s anime aesthetic nostalgia taste buds. It even has a rocking metal song blasting in the background with English and Japanese being used like it was Let's Go Fighting Love from South Park. It's like Taito wanting to make a Dragon Ball Z game but got turned down, so they ripped the licensing out and made this. Because unlike most fighting games, instead of fighting with your fists and maybe having access to one or two special projectile moves, here most of the combat is done from far away, with there being just a little bit of close combat if your opponent gets too close to you. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's actually kind of fun once you get the hang of it. It makes me feel like I'm playing an old school 2D shoot 'em up game, but in a versus mode or something. One other great thing this game has got going for it is the graphics. For the time, everything looks pretty damn slick. I did find this game a little bit easy though, because I could literally just spam the same attack over and over again and win. The roster is the area where I think this game is a big letdown. I mean, where the hell are my weirdos and monsters? I did get a raging clue when I saw that there was a story mode, however it turned out there was just an arcade mode with a little bit of VO before the battles. Which has got to be the laziest excuse for a story mode in a fighting game that I've ever seen. It did surprise me a little bit that this girl is completely naked for some reason though. I am totally not into that. How dare she assault my pure and virtuous eyes?
Oh my god. That's disgusting. Naked pics online?
And surprisingly, this weird game actually got a sequel, which was only released in Japan and PAL territories. It's weird how we got a lot of fighting games released over here for some reason that weren't released in Cheeseburger Land. Maybe fighting games were bigger sellers over here or something. Same thing happened with Bomberman back in the day actually. Anyway, Psychic Force 2 starts off promising enough like the first game with another banging anime intro. And I think I like this song more than the last one because there's no random English this time, it just has a good level of cheese. I really like cheese, me. And pretty much every complaint I had about the first game has been fixed here, apart from my disappointment in the roster. It's still just a bunch of generic looking anime people. Of all the games that could have used a wacky roster, this was one. That aside, the gameplay actually feels a lot better here and everything feels a little bit less disjointed and more crunchy. It feels really good to go up to your opponent and air juggle them against the walls with punches and kicks in this one. I got into a really nice rhythm in all the matches I played in this one and it just felt like an awesome anime battle. And the Mad Lads actually did it, they actually added in a proper story mode that's not this tacked on one that's basically the same as the arcade mode. I mean, it's not much more, but it feels like they actually put some effort into it and did actual cutscenes. Psychic Force 2 is quite good and definitely worth a try.
It is decent! Tell them, lad, it's decent!
But strangely enough, Psychic Force 1 and 2 aren't the only psychic powers based fighting games on the PS1. Because Destrega kinda does the same thing, except for they don't skimp out on the story mode and go all in with it. And this might be one of the best so bad it's good story modes in a fighting game I've ever seen. I actually used to play this game a lot on a demo disc as a kid and I always thought the combat was really fun. I never owned the full game though because it was one of those games I could never remember the name of. And then after searching through countless fighting games I finally unearthed it like some long lost relic. The gameplay in many ways is similar to Psychic Force with that Dragon Ball Z kind of feeling to it. The only difference here is that the battles take place on land and you run around an arena and use cover. It actually kind of feels like playing a weird one-on-one third-person shooter or something with you dodging mine bullets. Again, like Psychic Force, it isn't the best thing in the world, but I can run around and mash buttons and cool stuff happens. It's like the video game equivalent of dangling shiny keys in front of me. And that goes for the story mode as well, because for the time it's really well done. I mean, it has actual shots and animated cutscenes. I couldn't pay attention to the intro long enough to understand what was going on though, and that's definitely the game's fault and not mine. I usually just have the theme of Magic Roundabout on loop all day inside my spacious caveman head. What I can gather in my moments of clarity is that this evil guy behind the big table is trying to kill some other people because they use dice and vacuum cleaners and he's more of a fan of Henry the Hoover. It pretty much plays out like a Saturday morning kids cartoon with you controlling multiple different hero characters. Because I'm a sick goblin being, I find a kind of pure joy in playing something that's the PS1 version of Troll 2 or The Room. The voice acting is just so hilariously bad, the opening scene in particular always gets me.
Oh my god! The village!
Why did they have to cut it like that? They have to have known what they were doing. Another favourite of mine is the constant, and I mean constant, innuendo.
And I have a job for him to do. A very special job.
I could honestly sit here all day making fun of this whole story mode and have an absolute blast. However, I think you should go play it for yourself and have a laugh at it because it's certainly the most in-depth PS1 game story mode you'll ever play. Talking of things that are clearly taking inspiration from Dragon Ball, why don't we have a look at actual Dragon Ball games on the PS1? And I have a special animus towards this game in particular because I owned it as a kid jointly with my stepbrother. Now, this game actually got released in the UK in 1997, but it was at a time when no one cared about Dragon Ball yet. I don't remember Dragon Ball fever setting in here until the PS2 was out and around the time Pokemon was conquering the globe. And in many ways, anime was becoming mainstream at this time with stuff like Yu-Gi-Oh! Getting big as well. So when this happened, a lot of anime games for the last gen consoles were released or reissued at this time at bargain prices to cash in. And one of these games was Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, a game based on the worst Dragon Ball iteration. What could go wrong? Me and my stepbrother were massive Dragon Ball Z fans at the time, but we never really got into GT. We tried, we really did, but it's just too awful. And that's coming from someone who actually enjoyed Dragon Ball Super at times, even though it's kind of bad. This game wasn't a Z game, however it still had characters that we cared about from the older series, so we desperately wanted it. So we pulled together our pocket monies for weeks so that we could buy it and share the game. After saving up enough money, we finally got the game home and played it, only to find that it was complete doo-doo feces.
That is one big pile of shit.
Well, my stepbrother kinda liked it, but I think that was just cope because we wasted our money on it personally. And it seems like he's not alone in this cope, because to this day online I see people defending this game and saying that they like it. I guess it makes sense, there's people who like being tortured, although being tortured would be preferable to playing this game, to be honest with you. And let me tell you why that anyone who enjoys this game should be booking themselves into their nearest mental hospital. First off, it controls absolutely robotically, with every input feeling like it's working on sloth time. There's barely any moves you'd see from the show, and most of it's just punching and throwing key blasts. And it's disgusting to look at, like the 1513 painting The Ugly Duchess by Flemish artist Quentin Matsis. And add into the fact that there's basically nothing to do in the game. This game made me feel like me and my stepbrother had been robbed at knife point by a local cokehead. Actually, I think if we'd been robbed at knife point by a cokehead, I would have seen that as more value for our money. I look forward to seeing comments defending this game and calling me a bellend for the next 5 years until I finally succumb to my addiction to Greg's sausage rolls.
Give me something for the pain and let me die.
There was also an actual Dragon Ball Z game released for the PS1 called Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22. And I never played this one growing up, so here's hoping it's better than the absolute toss that was Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. Well, it is a better game than Final Bout, much better in fact. I would almost say that this is a perfectly playable game. I mean, it's ugly as sin to look at, but it plays fine enough, and it's just a bit of a budget game like the other game. I think we would have had a lot more fun if we'd had this game growing up instead. At least the roster is decent. I can't lie though, this game kind of sucks pretty bad as well. It's sad that there are two non-Dragon Ball games out there Dragon Balling harder than Dragon Ball on the PS1. At least we had a bunch of bangers later on, I guess. I didn't have a good way of segueing out of this section, so here's Niles Crane on a segue.
It's called a segue.
That was so smooth and seamless that you could swear the song Smooth by Carlos Santana and Rob Thomas of Maxbox 20 was written about me. So the next game I wanted to talk about is actually a D&D fighting game that I'm sure you never knew existed. Once I heard about this game, I was immediately intrigued, and when I looked up gameplay and found out you could play as a goblin, I was instantly in. I didn't even care if this game was any good or worth mentioning. It might very well be the only fighting game where you can play as a goblin. Now, I'm not 100% on that, but if you can think of any games where there's playable goblins, let me know. So this game is based on a specific D&D campaign, and all the playable characters are ones from that campaign. And sadly, the goblin is an evil villain. It's sad to see that my people are always betrayed as villains, and quite frankly, I think it's racist. Looking at the roster of characters, I actually got quite aroused looking at the cavalcade of monsters. This might be my dream PS1 fighting game. But, and that's a big damn but, when I finally got to experience the gameplay, I was in disbelief that I was playing something so bad. This might be one of the worst PS1 fighting games I've ever played, and it could actually give Final Bout a run for its money. Nothing works correctly, and you'll just be constantly hitting past your opponent and getting stuck backwards. The game is hideous, and it feels like it runs at about 2 frames a second. This is the biggest affront to my people since John Trud said those racist comments about us.
Ew, I like them. I like goblins.
But a game with a similar theme that doesn't totally suck ass is Cardinal Syn. Dare I say it's a bit of a hidden gem. The theme isn't the only thing that's similar, because even the gameplay here is kind of similar to Iron and Blood. The roster sadly doesn't have a goblin, but it's full of weirdos and monsters, and that's a big tick. And to make up for the fact that it doesn't have a goblin, it lets you play as Plague, who's the most lovable zombie you've ever seen. He just screams a less bony version of Sir Daniel Fortescue from the medieval games. And when you win, he does a little Irish dance, tiddly tiddly tee. I love that every character has their own little intro cutscene setting up their arcade mode. It adds a bit of flair to it. The battles essentially work like an arena game with items and obstacles being strewn around as you fight. And there's definitely things to look out for on each level, so it helps keep the fights interesting. The game is kinda like a good off-brand Soul Edge. It's not anywhere near as good as that, but it's still pretty decent. The fights are pretty crunchy, and I was actually quite enjoying myself. It does feel like the blocking is a little bit crap though. And I don't know about you, but mapping block to the circle button just feels wrong for some reason, and I kept it in X by accident. Cardinal Syn is just a decent little fighting game that I think more people need to give a go, and there's definitely nothing quite like it on the PS1. However, it does break my rule of not having a giant monster at the end of the arcade mode, instead opting for a half-naked sorcerer lady.
I'm going to allow this.
When I was a kid, the first movie I ever saw in the cinema was Jurassic Park: The Lost World. And while it isn't the best movie, I still to this day have fond memories of that movie and the series in general. I never got autistically into dinosaurs like a lot of kids did, but I thought they were pretty damn cool. I mean, they're just giant monsters, how could I resist? So imagine my shock when I found out doing some research for this video that there was a Jurassic Park fighting game. And as soon as I heard that, I knew this had to be in this video as an excuse to try it out, and what better way to end this video than with a dinosaur fighting game. Now, on a concept level, this game is perfect. You've got a bunch of dinosaurs, make them fight to prove who's the best. But let's be honest here, out of all the dinosaurs, the T-Rex will probably just murder them all. The problem, however, comes up when you have to actually play the game because it's just awful. The move pools for the dinosaurs are pitifully small and you never know when your attacks are actually connecting or not. I think the essence of a good fighting game is the feeling of your hits landing on your opponent feeling impactful. And here nothing feels good, and I'm extra annoyed with it because they had a really great idea for a game and wasted it. The thing is, I feel like if I played this game as a kid, I probably would have had a blast. Yeah, I know, because I was a kid and kids are stupid. If cool stuff was happening on the screen, I was happy, and I bet there's going to be a lot of people in the comments saying they loved this game growing up. I mean, I figured out I could just hit circle over and over again and win, and Kid Me would have loved that. He loved winning. I am pretty sad that there wasn't a story mode that gave all these dinosaurs desperate housewives drama with each other or something. Like Gigantosaurus wants T-Rex dead because T-Rex has been sleeping with his wife behind his back. You know, some world star hip hop level stuff. Obviously this game succeeds on the sharp-dressed goblin's lore of having monsters as the last boss, because they're all monsters, innit? But part of me is sad that the final boss wasn't just a giant Jeff Goldblum with tiny little T-Rex arms that does this weird laugh instead of roaring. PS1 fighting games will always have a special place in my heart because they remind me of so many people in my family. No matter how old I get, I'll never forget playing Tekken 2 with my parents and my brother, or Soul Blade with my sister. My relationship with fighting games might have started on the SNES, but my love of the genre was cemented here on the PS1. And this was just a brief walk through the console's incredibly stacked lineup of fighting games. It wasn't meant to be a comprehensive history or anything, or this video would end up being 3 hours long. It was just meant to be a little walk down memory lane and an excuse to talk about a bunch of games that I love. This is definitely a format I quite like and might use to cover more consoles and genres in the future. But on closing here, I want to hear some of your favourite memories with PS1 fighting games down in the comments. And maybe tell me what ones you'd want to see in a part 2 of this video that I very well might do further down the road. There's obviously a few heavy hitters I left out of this one because I wanted to leave some for the next video. Anyway, I've been a Goblin and thank you for watching. If you would like to get all my videos early and to get your name in the credits, sign up on Patreon like all these awesome people have. Links in the description.